Thank you. Thanks, Rahul. Thanks so much. I hope I'm audible. And even before we start, I have I have a confession that everything that can go wrong in technology goes wrong in me. So you can imagine how difficult a time it is. It has been for me personally, struggling with technology and making sure it gets right. So this is in the interest of full disclosure. If there's a challenge, it's all my fault. It's not the fault of technology. Just ping me and I'll figure out how to fix that. And thank you so much for having me over at the Shared Services Forum to share my thoughts. And really so I'm actually not an HR professional. So that's the secret. I've actually been a banker for most of my life. And after that, for the last 10 or 12 years, I've actually been in what I call the human or the people industry. And so I come in with a very business perspective. I used to head Future Sharp Skills Limited, which is among India's largest skilling and employability providers. And then for the last year and a half, I've actually been running my own enterprise that's called Eika. And Eika, as we describe it, is the wisdom organization from India for the world. So that's who I am. That's what I do. And as I was listening to the comments in the earlier panel and all the conversation that's been happening around us, I'm a person who thinks in threes. And I think that's true for most of us as human beings, right? So there are three things that so most of us look at the world in the form of threes. So whether it's Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, Sam Walton said location, 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 the three dimensions of height, width, and breadth. And the fourth is always an addition. So time, three estates of legislature, judiciary, and the executive, and then the fourth estate of the press. So I've always seen the world in threes. So the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. And as an aside, my private joke to myself is how the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost is actually so similar to the whole idea of Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh. But yeah, well, that's for a different day and a different session. So therefore, because I think we organize the human space in threes, organize the world in threes, because as a lot of neuroscientists will tell you, the human ability to process is in the form of threes. It's easiest to take in, it's easiest to remember, it's easiest to make sense of. In fact, even when we look at how the universe and the world is organized, it is Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha. So the Patal Lok, the netherworld is the earth we live in, and then of course the heavens above. So the world is organized in threes. And so therefore I should organize this in threes as well. The three things that I want to talk to you about is why are we having this conversation? And I'm sure a lot of context setting has already happened. What does it mean for us, and how do we deal with it as humans, as not just as professionals of in the space of human resources, but just as humans ourselves? Because I truly believe in first principles. If we can decode human beings, if we can decode how humans think, if we can figure out how to intervene at the individual level, then you can just extrapolate that same learning. If you've got your first principle right, you just extrapolate it further to families and societies and organizations and nations and civilizations. So those are three things I want to talk about. The first one is the why, right? Why are we having this conversation? A lot of context setting has happened. There is the new normal. There's the emergence into a new workplace where old rules and systems have collapsed. But what are the consequences therefore? So in my view, there are, again, three consequences. And I will take just one second on each of them before I move on. The first consequence, and the way I view the world is, and especially at the organizational structure, I found it very useful to view the world in the context of me. How does it impact me? Mine, those that are around me. So mine in my personal context is my family, my friends, the people I interact with. Mine in the professional context is my team, my supervisor, my immediate one down, my first degree of separation. And then there's mankind. So mankind in my personal context is in the context of your societies and your buildings and your groups and your tribes and your communities. The same in your industry, in your professional workplace, where it's your industry, where it's your peer group, where it's a cohort that you create. Those are mankind. So the consequences, the why of this conversation is ऐसा क्या हुआ है? What are the changes that have happened that need us to necessitate this conversation? So at the me level, my worldview is that we've lost our sense of identity. Everything that we held dear to us, everything that we thought was the way the script was to be played out, everything that we thought was our definition, our hinging of existence, has suddenly collapsed. Right? And I find it very useful to pick up the context from science. So there's this whole concept of space time. So we define and describe our universe in the context of space and time. Kahan ho aur kab ho. So where's the earth? Where's the universe? How's India? Where you are? So if I had to ask you, who are you? What are you? The answer typically will come in the context of either the space you occupy. So what's the space? The space is the role you play, the responsibilities you have, the offices you have, the places you live, where you've studied, those are space and times. So, I'm a student, that's my student phase. I'm a professional, I'm a father, I'm a mother, etc., etc. Now, here's where it gets very interesting. In the last year and a half, our space times have collapsed. Earlier, we had spaces. There was a workspace, there was a professional space, there was a home space, there was a workout and a gym space, there was a meeting friends and going out to the club space. We had different spaces. And we existed in different time zones, right? This is work time. So life was structured in the dimensions of space and in the dimensions of time. So this is my me time, this is my travel time, this is my family time, this is my work time. All of this is how we defined and hinged our existence. When the last year and a half, space times have collapsed. This whole thing of working from home, the lockdown, spaces have disappeared. We're all limited to the space of the four walls we live in. And now, of course, therefore, are looking forward to moving out. The concept of time has become completely variable. So in a lot of conversations that I have with my fellow HR colleagues, the biggest issue that's coming in from employees and even leaders is this whole idea that there are no sanctities of time. कभी भी कुछ भी करते हैं, मतलब work continues on to forever. In the middle of that work, you're also cooking, you're also looking at your child going to school. There are other things happening. So there is no, all of this space time has become this one amorphous entity. And therefore, for us personally, our sense of identities have become very difficult to define. So there's that sense of, so who am I? Where am I? How am I? What am I? Right? So that's the first consequence at the me level. That I think necessitates this conversation of emergence into the new normal, of rebuilding ourselves out, of figuring out how we redesign ourselves. The second is, like I said, at the level of the mankind, my immediate relationships. So our immediate relationships have obviously changed, right? Where earlier we had friends and family, today our relationship and dynamics with them have changed. Our relationship and dynamics with our teams have changed. And there was earlier, now when I meet my team, I meet them on a Zoom call, I meet them on a Teams meet, we discuss our work and we go back. There was earlier a space where in engaging with my peers, with my colleagues, the whole emphasis, and frankly, we as professionals in the people industry have insisted that it needs to be, you need to know the personal context, you need to have a connect, there needs to be a small talk, there needs to be a relationship outside of work. All of that has been lost. We don't have that sense of people any longer. And while that's happening at the more personal, individual level, the fact is that time has also changed. So from an era where we were industrialists and we worked according to the industrial rules, factory, assembly line, 9 to 5 working, we moved into the era of information where, so when we were children, right, we came first, or you did the best if you gained the most information. So जिसको ज़्यादा information मिल गई, वो first आ गया. That was the rule. So I didn't need to be my best self. I just needed to have more information, access to more information than you, and I was good enough. So suddenly where we moved in this world, and this happened some years ago. So actually it's not just the last year and a half of COVID, but the fact is this has been building up. In the last year and a half, it just catalyzed this whole process of, moving to the next level of the new world order. And in this new world order, information is a commodity. We are all overloaded with information at every end. It is what we do with this information. It is how we process it. It is how we move it from information to intuition or insight is what determines how good or how bad I am. the interesting thing about that, and this is, by the way, in the relationship with all my, with whether I do this in my personal space, so whether I'm dealing with my family or my friends, or I do it in the professional space, whether I'm dealing with my team, whether I'm dealing with my seniors, whether I'm dealing with my clients, the rules have changed from accessing or making information or data available to being able to process it, crunch it out, and moving from information to insight or to intuition. The challenge with that is competitioning. So it's not a function, therefore, of, because information or just quantity is a function of whether I have more or you have more. It's simple. But how you process it from information to intuition or to insight is actually a function of your own processing capabilities. So suddenly there's no competition. You're only being your best self. It's not apples to oranges. It's about saying, how good are you with the information that you can process? How best do you analyze it? How can you do it the best? Because there's no comparison any longer. And that has gotten catalyzed even more now in the context of the fact that we don't even see our people any longer. So that's the second one. So the first consequence of first why we're necessitating is at me level, where there's a lack of sense of identity and space-time. The second one is around the fact that our relationship with the world, immediate world around us has changed. And then, of course, there's that third level, which is the mankind level, which is the level of the industry, which is the level of what's going to happen, how does the future look like. And we've all had these conversations on future of work, the re-emerging into the new normal. These conversations have happened. Right? So that's the third reason to say, how do I lead in a world that I don't know? How do I make sense of the world that's emerging? And that's what's really necessitated this conversation here. A lot has already been spoken about this, and a lot of other conversations has happened. So I won't go into this one. The second aspect of context on this is the what. See, if this is the why, if this is why we are having this conversation, so what are the questions we need to ask? What are we talking about even? And this again, I'll break down again into those same levels of me, mind, and mankind. So at the first level, if the sense of identity is being challenged, if the sense of space-time is being challenged, then the obvious question to ask ourselves is, what do I need to do to adjust? And by I, it's not a function of what I need to do professionally or personally, but just as a human being, how do I emerge in this world being my best version? Because the script that I've been playing out so far doesn't exist any longer. My space-time identities are lost. How do I emerge into the new normal? To me, that this only has one, and we've spoken about it, right? We've spoken about reskilling, we've spoken about design thinking, we've spoken about Six Sigma, we've spoken about how technology needs to be an enabler and a medium. And Kavita, really kudos to you, because you brought it out really well, this whole idea of our obsession with technology, where technology is actually just a medium. It's not the be all and the end all, and we need to understand the use of it. So that's the first one. What do I need to do? How do I need to let go of my limiting beliefs? How do I make myself powerful, strong, and complete in this new world that's emerging? That's the first question. At the mind level, and this one's interesting because in the last couple of months, I've had a lot of organizations reach out to us. So obviously now that we're emerging, we're beginning to meet again. And now that we're meeting again, there is a certain awkwardness. So a lot of offsites that are now happening, of course, they're called strategic business planning offsites, and that's what they really are. But a lot of organizations have been reaching out to me with two questions. Can you help us address two questions? The first one is that when we kick off, because a lot of our team members, a lot of our people have been hired in this last year and a half, they don't know each other. We've met each other on Zoom calls, on Teams, but there's no personal connect. So therefore, there's also a sense of insecurity, right? There's a sense of you don't know who has your back, how do the rules play out? Those are things that happen in the real world. So now that we're meeting in the real world for the first time, can you help us come together in that room? So not just break the ice, but break the awkwardness. Can you gracefully bring us in together as one voice, one team, and enable us to have a conversation? That's the first thing that a lot of organizations ask me. So relearning the rules of engagement. And the second and the more interesting one, which relates to the third question we need to ask, which is, what is this new world going to look like? So a lot of organizations come to us asking with this question of what are the questions I need to ask if I'm doing my strategic planning meet. Um, so in an earlier time, my business planning meet would suffice if I just turned around and said, Acha, this is my sales target, this is the number I will do, this is the distribution that I'll do, this is how I'll expand. A typical people office conversation around the same, around strategic planning, would be about saying that, look, this is what we're going to change in our recruitment, our TA, and this is how we're going to rescale our employees, etc. And that's how the conversation used to be. Now organizations are actually asking that, what do I need to ask? What are the questions I need to ask? To me, why it's also fascinating, and I think Rahul mentioned, and for those of you who've seen or read about me, I do a lot of work with ancient wisdom. The reason that I go back to ancient scriptures is actually two reasons. One is that I just feel that if we have a civilization that's been there for the last 5,000 years and has survived and is the world's oldest living civilization, they must have gotten some survival hacks right. There's something they've obviously done right. So that's the first reason that I always go back to scriptures, and I've never been disappointed, I must confess. And the second reason I go back is that because that's our blood memory. That really is who we are. If I have to help figure out who you really are, stripped of what you've learned, acquired, believe yourself to be, then it is your mythology, which is the most tangible unit of your value belief systems. The heroes you worship, the stories you believe in, the symbols you look after, the rituals you celebrate, etc. So every time that I go back there, and I was hunting for answers to these questions that organizations were asking me. This thing about what are the questions to ask, and we had this fascinating conversation. I must bring it out here, where it says that the answers you get will be a function of the questions you ask. And across, so when we talk about even ancient scriptures, across millennia now, the scriptures have been an outcome of the popular sentiment. They are the effect, they are not the cause. The cause is the sentiment, right? So there used to be a time when we were, so when human civilization was coming together and the rules of civilization were being established. And then the question was, kya karna chahiye? What do we need to do? Right? So it was what we used to call the Karma Yuga. And the Karma Yuga ka output, therefore, was SOPs, process manuals. What do you need to do? How do you need to do it, etc., etc. And which is why the texts that emerged from there were the Vedas. From there, after you've done this whole process of how do you need to do something, what do you need to do, the SOP manuals are done, there began this curiosity. Why do I need to do this? What's our deeper worldview? The whole knowledge seeking, right? Which was the whole Jnana Yuga, the information age. And therefore, the output of that Yuga was the output that was your Vedanta, which were the commentaries on the Vedas, which is your Upanishads, which are pure philosophy texts, which explain the world in a larger context. And then somewhere about 1500, about 2500 odd years ago, which is when organized religion happened across the world. So it doesn't matter which religion we're talking about, but from organizing ourselves as a civilization and human beings, we started organizing ourselves in tribes and communities. When that started happening, then that's when prescription came in, right? So Christianity, Islam, Jainism, Buddhism, even Hinduism became an organized religion. And so the questions changed to bhakti, to the idea of what are the rituals to be done? How do we just surrender? What's the faith? What's the idea? And therefore the bhakti texts emerge, which is pure Puran, your Puranic texts and the stories and the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, etc. The question to ask, and by the way, this has had a parallel even in our work lives. So our work lives, as long as we know our corporate structures, our first stage was the industrial age, which was just a pure task-based SOP, do this kind of an age. From there, we moved to the information age, which is why do we do this? And therefore, the whole glut of information that we spoke about earlier. To where we moved to some kind of bhakti age, where we were doing things as they needed to be done. And suddenly we've been jolted out of the blue. In the philosophical studies of Eastern systems, most people will tell you And that's, what's the question I need to ask, that organizations are asking, that we as individuals are asking. And there, that question that emerges is, what's next? Now, in all of my ancient wisdom texts, whether you look at the Brahma Vaivartya Purana, or you look at the Upanishads, whether it's Kena or a Katho, it doesn't matter. All of them talk about the next yuga that's emerging. And this really has huge insights for us as human resource professionals. The next yuga that's emerging is the yuga of Nyaya. Nyaya Yuga is the yuga of individual justice, freedom, liberty, and human rights. It's the yuga that says that, what about me? How about me? Who am I? It's no longer the prescriptive yuga कि तुमने कह दिया ऐसा होना चाहिए. And in the previous panel, both the Kavitas also spoke about this, about saying that this is no longer prescriptive. You can't any longer tell people this is what you need to do and it'll get done. That's in armies used to happen. That's in wars used to happen. They happen on the principle of this is what you need to do and it'll get done. The yuga that we are moving into is the Nyaya Yuga. The texts will emerge when they emerge. But if we don't lead that change from now on, we'll be struggling with answers on this one. So that's the two things we've spoken of. The why. So at my level, I'm losing my identity. At me, so that's at me level. At the mind level, I need to figure out, I've lost the sense of engagement with those around me. And at the mankind level, we're trying to figure out what's happening to the future of work, what's happening to industries, how's the world going to emerge. At the what level, the three questions are, therefore, what do I need to do to reclaim myself, to be my best version? At the mind level, how do I re-engage and re-establish trust, and trust and create symbiotic one team voices again? And then at the mankind level, the question is, what are the questions we need to ask to enable us to be in the future? Now comes to the third one, which, and by the way, all of this has been spoken of. So really that was just the context. But now comes to, therefore, how do I do it? What is it that we can do as human resource professionals, as business partners to leadership, and really as managing what has now emerged the most critical resource, which is people. Here again, I want to talk about three things. And these three things aren't organizational. They are not, they're not what we learn in our MBAs and MB schools. They're not things we are taught. What I would like us to become aware of is the idea of how a human being, how any person can make this shift. And if we can make this shift at our individual levels, like I said, then it's very easy to extrapolate it further up to our societies and organizations. So the first thing that I want to talk about in that again is, how do you know you need to change? How do you identify where somebody is operating from? For me, it's fascinating. And by the way, this is true again for organizations, for families, and for civilizations. This derives itself from the Bhagavad Gita ka concept of Kshetra, which, by the way, in our B school and organization structures, we've been calling the circle of control and the circle of concern. Anytime that you operate, so the concept of Kshetra is ki mere control mein kya hai? Anything that is my body, whether it's my physical body, emotional body, spiritual body, intellectual body, that's within my control. The moment I start concerning myself or trying to exert control on that which is not mine, that's when fear, panic, stress, anger, resentment, irritation, sarcasm, sadness will happen. Right? Why is this relevant to us? For years, as human resource professionals, we've done assessments, we do psychometric analysis, we teach people team management, personal effectiveness. We've been talking about all of these questions. What we haven't spoken, we've spoken about TA also, by the way, that which is the mind state you're operating from, etc. What we've not been observant of, we've done emotional intelligence, but what we've not been observant of or aware of is the emotion that you are operating from. Because my Bhagavad Gita tells me that any time that you're operating not from your circle of control, but from your circle of concern, That's where anger, panic, helplessness, all of that happens, right? It's important to identify. So anytime that you see somebody being either angry or hurt or depressed or offended or sarcastic or irritated, know that it is so because they're operating outside their control. And I'm going to do one quick thought experiment on this one. For everybody around the room, take that 1 minute to remember the last time you were angry and what were you angry about. Inevitably, you were angry about something that was beyond your control. It was something that somebody else would have done. In the personal context, it is something that your spouse may have said, or your children need to study and they haven't studied. In the professional context, it's in the context of mere boss ne mujhe promotion nahi diya. How will I, or any in the context of saying that I delivered my work, but that function did not deliver, etc. The reason it's important to become aware of this is when we are aware of where our emotions are operating from, that's when we start taking responsibility and making the shift. And I'll take a very, very public example on this one, right? COVID happened. A lot of us have been about panic and fear, and I will get COVID or my family will get COVID, and what will happen, and hospitals and beds. All of us went through that phase 6 months ago. There's none of us around the room who wasn't impacted. You can either panic or be in fear because you can't change those circumstances. Nothing's changing there. But why it's important to become aware and recognize it, because then you can make this shift from concern to control. So yes, I understand there is COVID all around, there's panic, there's mayhem. What can I do? And that's really what it came down to, in terms of saying that I can wear a mask, I can sanitize my hands, I can maintain 6 feet of distance, I can stay indoors and isolate myself. And suddenly you shifted from concern to control. The same thing is what I would urge. The reason I mentioned this is that this is what I would urge each of us to do. And because we are in a function that influences the thought around the organization, around the leadership, around the employee pool, urge each of them to do, to say, and I know we've been talking about taking responsibility and accountability and ownership, but this is more than ownership, responsibility, and accountability. This is about shifting control into your own self, into saying that mera kya role hai? What can I do? What do I need to do, irrespective of what's happening in the circumstance? That's one way of making sense of the world around us. It's one way of addressing what we've been speaking about in terms of loss of identity and space times. It's one way of making sure that we start moving into control rather than panic and fear about the chaos around us. From helplessness, we move into control. That's the first one. The second one, and which is what we spoke about earlier, how do I let go of my self-limiting beliefs? And this one's very interesting because it's so simple, as Sherlock Holmes says, it's so overt that it is covert. When we are not operating from our core, our center, and again, class 10th science, if you remember center of gravity, right? You remember that dipping thing that used to be there. There used to be that bird with a beak, and it used to dip and then rise up again, dip into water and rise up again. The principle of center of gravity. If you're not operating from your center of gravity, we've discussed this enough, right? That if you bend forward enough, when you're standing straight, the center of gravity is within you. If you keep bending forward, the CG shift till you fall over when you go out of balance. When we can't find our center of gravity inside of us, when we can't find our core inside of us, we look for external scripts to hinge our suppositions on, our value beliefs on. What does that mean? The narrative that we've played for years, right? That you join the corporate world, it's cool, it's respectful. Beta lawyer ban jao, doctor ban jao, MBA kar lo. Wahan tum aa gaye ho, ab iske baad you should, that classic Hindu rate of growth from AVP to VP to SVP to EVP. Follow that script. Matlab yahi tumhara satya hai, yahi tumhe karna chahiye. And therefore we hinge ourselves onto those scripts because we can't find our own. And they then become our self-limiting beliefs. By the way, we practice this in our personal lives. We practice this in our professional lives. You must do this. You should do this. This is the only way to do this because that's how I've been taught. That's what I'm comfortable about. That's the only truth I know. And the reason that I speak to you about this, about the second thing, is because it's very important to move from how the world must be, should be, because that's what we arranged on. But in this time of shifting sands, where these rules hold no longer, where the worlds are shifting, where the stream of consciousness is shifting, you can't hold on to something that may or may not exist at all. How do you release yourself of this? And the simplest thing that I will say just now on this one is watch your language. If the first one was about becoming aware of your emotions, where you're operating from and making that shift, the second one is about making that watching, becoming aware of your words. Every time, and hear this very carefully, every time you use words like should, must, supposed to, यही सत्य है, यही सही है, गलत है, right, wrong, good, bad, every time we use any of these words, we are operating from one of our shadows. We are operating from a space, from a limiting belief. We are operating, so we are operating from a space which is defined not by what I really want to do, what the reality is, but what I'd like it to be. Now, I'll give you a very chota sa example, right? We hold ourselves on to the rules. So when I walked in as the CEO of the company that I was heading, 80% of my team was much older than I was. And when I walked in, I had this whole sense of, how a leader, and we've all been through this, right? Our perception of what a leader must be, and a leader must be assertive and strong and know it all, etc., etc., etc. But the moment I walk in and I pretend to know it all because I must, otherwise log kya kahenge, and that's the big one around this. I don't learn. B, I can never carry the authenticity of my own thought. The same is true for every single employee. इसमें level से कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. Across the board, it's true. Across organizations, it is true. Across functions, it is true. It stops you from learning. It stops you from being curious. It prevents you from therefore growth. So the second one is about saying that watch the words you use. Every time you find yourself using these words, stop, pause, and think, is that true? Especially words like I'm right, you're wrong, but this is the only thing to do. Like in my household, by the way, and now it's history, but we can talk about it. The rule in the house is very simple. If you come, and this, by the way, the same was true for my organization as well, that I may be the CEO, but I will never be know it all. So it's okay if you walk into me and you're giving me an idea. And I've turned on and spoken to my teams saying exactly this, that look, I don't think I understand this. Would you like to explain it to me from scratch again? But why do we need to do this? And it's okay to be curious rather than saying, yeah, yahi sahi hai, aise hi hona chahiye, because it allows us to create alternatives. When my children come to my house and they say that, so Donald Trump, right? Somebody will come in and say that Donald Trump is an idiot. And I'm very clear about saying, fine, you can have your opinion, but unless you're able to tell me why 50% of the nation voted for him, that opinion doesn't hold value. You're seeing this theme, by the way, play out in our media, in our politics, in our organizational policies very often right now. This sense of he sahi hai, and we the more insecure we are within us, the more fear we have within us, the stronger we hold on to those beliefs outside of us. Because if I let go of those, I'll drift. So that's the second thing that I want to put out there. The third one, therefore, is obviously, how does this shift happen? And all of us here are familiar with neurosciences. We're familiar with the whole idea of neuroplasticity. We're familiar with the idea of setting up new beliefs and new patterns. And why it's interesting is because, the mind, the brain is a very simple object. The brain is a binary brain. That's how, by the way, our technology works on the binary systems, because the brain is a binary brain. It either has something or doesn't have something. It doesn't have the concept of undoing or a no. So again, a quick thought experiment around the room. I'm going to tell everybody around the room that think of anything. Think of anything, but don't think of pink monkeys. And guess what's happened? Right? For all of us who didn't even know what pink monkeys are, suddenly all of us are thinking, there are all kinds of forms of pink monkeys dancing around us. So the brain does not recognize a no. The brain does not recognize undoing something. So imagine saying, I'm not going to get angry. I am not going to get angry. I am not going to get angry. And the only thing that you're doing is getting angry. The brain is focused only on anger. It doesn't understand not getting angry. And this is, by the way, the basic principle of neuroplasticity. And this, by the way, we've been very familiar with as children. So we've heard this whole shloka, asatoma satkamaya tamasoma jyotirgamaya. The whole concept of that is that you don't take away darkness. You just introduce light. You don't say, no, I don't want dark. I don't want dark. I don't want. You just introduce light. You don't not tell lies. You simply tell the truth. And this, for me, has been the biggest shift that's happened in the last 12 years. This shift of not using negative words allows you to have that pause which blocks you out. So unless we open ourselves, unless we start replacing the negative with the alternative, we will not be able to let go of our self-limiting beliefs. If we don't let go of our self-limiting beliefs, we will never come back into control. That the kshetra, the concept of the kshetra we first spoke of. So that's the third one about neuroplasticity and setting up alternates to negatives. And that's the third thing I would urge all of us. And by the way, this, like I said, all these three principles operate at the human level, because I truly believe that if we can understand and change ourselves as humans, the rest of it will follow. Organizations will follow. The same rules apply. The same principles will apply, as long as we can get this right, because it's eventually us who run these organizations, right? So that's the third one that I want to talk about, that I want to put out there, replacing the negative with the alternative. So if that's the how that we can instill in ourselves as people, in the teams we work with, in the leaderships we support, in the organizations that we create, these three things, the fact of becoming aware of our emotions and therefore shifting from concern to control, the fact of becoming aware of our words that we use so that we can let go of self-limiting beliefs, either as people or as families or as organizations, and replacing the negative with the alternative. If we can do that at our individual, team, family, organization, our support structure levels, then we would have enabled ourselves to answer those three questions that we spoke of earlier. How do I let go of my self-limiting beliefs in my space? How do I re-engage with love, with respect, with affection, with listening to understand, as we spoke of earlier, with diversity and inclusion, because then we are speaking about respect in the context of those around us. And it allows us to ask ourselves a question of, what does my organizational future look like? Because suddenly I'm not assuming or supposing or already having biases or judgments around what needs to happen, but I make it much easier to make that shift. Once that happens, that allows us, and I come back to how I started this conversation, it allows us to come back to the why of establishing the new normal, reclaiming our identities, reclaiming our relationships and team structures, and reclaiming leadership, thought leadership, performance leadership, and business leadership in our organizations and our societies. So with that, and with those 3 by 3 9 things that we spoke of, I'm now open to questions, chats, thoughts, suggestions. And like I said, I promised you earlier, I'm technology challenged. Where can I find the questions, please? Are there any chat messages, anything there?
So let me jump in here to.
Namaste, Anandji, kaise aap?
Absolutely fantastic, good, and absolutely feeling much better after hearing you for the last 40 minutes or so. So Eika, welcome once again to Shared Services Forum, and it has been mesmerizing listening to you, the way you have connected some of the wisdom content in our scriptures and the power of the three to everything that you have narrated. It's been very, very well received. I think, as I see, if you can please click on the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A.
Oh, I found it. I found it unengaging.
Absolutely. And the first one is actually a statement. And there is a second one I'm reading now is also echoing what you have just said, that people are able to relate to it so much. So unless there are specific, you want to respond to any of these statements, that's fine.
So I'll actually quickly just read to that. Srinivas, you've spoken about a couple of things. The first one is about industrialization and alienation. We're looking at it from hindsight. If you were looking at it from the context then, which is why I spoke about this whole thing, that the texts or the scriptures or the output that any yuga produces is a function of the popular sentiment. At that point of time, and which is why I compared the Karma Yuga to the whole industrialization era. The Karma Yuga was about doing SOP manuals, processes, aisa hi hota hai, aisa hona chahiye. So that there is some reference point that we've created. Otherwise, we'd be amorphously drifting. The same thing was true for industrialization. So while we are seeing it in hindsight to say कि यार ये तो बड़ा ही primitive था, physical alienation from mankind था, उस समय इसकी जरूरत थी. It was needed then. And which is why that shift has happened from industrial era to information era to the era of insights and intuition. That's how evolution happens, right? Even in the computers world, when we were growing up, computers were basically information. They moved from data to information. Now what we're trying to do with AI and with deep machine learning is move from information to insight or intuition, plug into larger networks, learn from iterative frameworks. And that's what we're doing as human beings as well. From SOP manuals to the quest for truth to maybe now the Nyaya Yuga, which is about individual human justice and right, which is probably what the Yuga of the future will be. मैं कौन हूँ, मैं क्या हूँ, मेरे लिए क्या जरूरी है. And if I can find self-fulfillment, the whole Mahavakya of Tata Tvama Asi, that which you are, and I bow down to the divinity within you. But Aham Brahmasmi, I am the divine infinite universe. If I can take care of myself and get my mind, my body, my intellect aligned and sorted, the rest of the world will take care of itself. And honestly, if as human resource professionals we can make that one shift, we would have arrived. We would have cracked the code. I hope that helps. I'm going further. Fulfill our absolutely, Srinivas, you're right that it's not about expanding our circle of influence and control, but identifying where I'm operating from. If I'm upset because my daughter hasn't finished her homework and that's causing me stress, then it's stress because I can't do her homework for her, however much I would have wanted to do her homework. Right? If I'm upset because my team is not delivering, I'm upset because I can't physically deliver it. So it's not about expanding my circle of control. It's about identifying where I'm operating from, and therefore, what can I do to make that shift, right? So I may be very upset that there's a team member or there's a parallel team that's not responding to something, and that's causing me anger and stress because my task is being held up. I can either sit there, get stressed, worry about it, crib, cry, complain, whine, scream at them, or I can make that shift by taking active steps, calling up, saying, is there a challenge? Can I help you with something? I need this thing done. Can I sit down with you and help you do it? And shift it into my control because kaam mera khatam ho gaya. And I know it sounds very elementary, at a leadership forum that we're talking about this, but my objective is just to bring us back to first principles. And let's not forget what the first principles of human existence are. Srinivas talks about insecurity. Nilesh says, thank you so much, Nilesh. Thank you so much. And Sundaram says, resilience is such a magical word for entrepreneurs and professionals. How can we cultivate this as a culture in an organization? Fabulous question, Sundaram. Fabulous question. I have come to believe that resilience or reflection, re-emergence. Actually, I love the word resonance. So Ekam and the organization that I run is actually about resonance more than resilience. So resilience is about holding through the tough times. Resonance is about punching above your weight. It's about shining in your brightest, brilliantest, bestest version that you can be. So the way I look at the world is not in terms of saying, ki, how do I last through this? But I always, so, remember that thing we spoke about neuroplasticity? I can either focus on what's holding me back, how do I fight that? Or I can focus on what do I need to do. So I can either be resilient about the pandemic, about health, about disease and fear, or I can be resonant in saying, how can I use the time? Because I can't change anything around me. So to me, resilience is about two things. One is making that shift from the negative, the pain, the misery to the positive. What can be done? What's good about this? How can I make this work? And the second and most important, it's about the here and the now. It isn't about tomorrow, day after. You don't need to say, how am I going to last the year? You need to last this hour, this minute. And that's what karmanye vadikaraste is. So very often we've been told ki karma karo, or forget the fruits and the rewards of that. I think that's bunkum. That's bunkum, because as human beings we are basically about the rewards. That's why you're doing the karma. To me, karmanye vadikaraste is actually about saying that live in the here and the now, trust the process. And Newton's second law of motion, right? Third law, every action has consequence. If you've done the action you need to do now, the consequence will follow for sure. So it isn't about where you need to reach, it's about what you need to do now. So resilience to me is not a long-term, painful, gritty, tough process. It's about lasting now. It's about getting over this hour, this minute, today and tomorrow. And I think eventually, of course, it becomes years and times and eras and yugas change with that. So I hope that helps. And really, that's what I want to leave behind with, those three things of just saying that become aware of your emotions, become aware of your words, become aware of your emotions. They allow you to shift from concern to control. Become aware of your words. They allow you to identify your self-limiting beliefs and go beyond them, becoming curious and breaking through them. And the third one is replace the negative with the alternative. It is immensely powerful. Whether you do it in SMS, text, email, in your words around you, you suddenly realize that, and it's a game you're playing with yourself, there's no counterparty in this. And you suddenly realize that the respect you earn from outside and your own mind that you open up from within, it's unbelievable. So I hope that helps.
So very much. It has been absolutely a delight listening to you, and I think the entire audience, both online and those who are joining us beyond the live show, they will always be very much grateful to your time being spent with us. So once again, on behalf of Shared Services Forum, my deep sense of gratitude for this special talk that you delivered just now, and